How can a man who built everything for his family be told he doesn't belong at his own table? What happens when a harmless old guy responds to years of disrespect not with anger, but with a calm, calculated act that no one saw coming? The night my daughter-in-law handed me an observer badge and my own son told me, "Food's for family," they thought I'd just accept my place. They were wrong. The evening started like any other New Year's Eve for the past 3 years. I'd spent the afternoon preparing my house, the house I built with my own hands after 15 years operating cranes and another decade climbing the ranks to senior management at Hartwell Construction. The dining room table gleamed under the chandelier Linda and I had picked out 28 years ago, back when we still believed in forever. The kitchen counters sparkled, stocked with enough food to feed a small army. But I wasn't cooking anymore. That privilege had been quietly stripped away, just like everything else. "Frank, could you move those boxes to the garage?" Brittany Foster Mercer swept into my living room like she owned the place, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors I'd installed myself. Behind her, her parents Gerald and Denise Foster carried themselves with that particular brand of arrogance that comes from inherited money and a lifetime of looking down on people who actually work for a living. "Evening, Gerald. Denise." I nodded politely as I gathered the boxes Brittany had gestured toward. Boxes that had been sitting in my living room for exactly 5 minutes. Gerald barely glanced my way, too busy examining my mantelpiece like he was appraising it for auction. "Brittany, darling, remind me, when are you and Travis planning to upgrade? This place has such potential." The word potential hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I'd heard it before, always delivered with that same patronizing smile, always implying that everything I'd built, everything I'd accomplished, was somehow lacking. "Soon, Daddy," Brittany called from the kitchen, where she was rearranging the dishes I'd already set out. "Travis has some exciting projects lined up. We're thinking of expanding our space significantly." I carried the boxes to my garage workshop, the one place in this house that still felt like mine. Through the window, I could see their dream home, a sleek, modern, movable house that Travis had positioned in the prime spot of my 3-acre yard. Full sun exposure, perfect views of the distant hills, close enough to my main house for easy utility connections. When they'd asked to park it there, temporarily, 18 months ago, I'd been happy to help. Family helps family, after all. The sound of my son's laughter drifted across the yard as Travis emerged from their house, wearing a sweater that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. At 34, he'd inherited my height and Linda's sharp jawline, but somewhere along the way, he'd also picked up his in-laws' talent for making me feel invisible in my own space. "Dad!" Travis called out, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness I'd grown to recognize. "Hope you're ready for a great evening. Brittany's parents brought some incredible wine, probably a bit sophisticated for your usual taste, but you might enjoy watching us try it." Watching. Always watching. Never participating. I rejoined the group on my back deck, where Denise was holding court about their recent trip to Napa Valley. The outdoor table, the one I'd built from reclaimed oak, was set for 6 people. Linda sat at one end, looking elegant and distant as always. She'd maintained her figure and her poise through our divorce, attending family events with the practiced grace of someone fulfilling an obligation. Brittany's parents occupied the seats with the best view, naturally. Travis sat beside his wife, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. The 6th chair held a stack of Brittany's designer shopping bags. "Frank, we're just about ready to start," Brittany announced, rising from her seat with theatrical flourish. "But first, I have something special for you." She reached into one of her bags and pulled out a small plastic badge, the kind you might see at a corporate conference. In bold, cheerful letters, it read, "Observer." "We thought this would be perfect for you tonight," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You can watch us enjoy our family dinner and really take in the whole experience." Gerald chuckled, a sound like ice cubes clinking in an expensive glass. Brilliant idea, sweetheart. Frank can observe how a proper family celebration should work. Denise tittered behind her wine glass. Oh, that's precious. Like having our own little documentary filmmaker. I took the badge, feeling its cheap plastic edges against my calloused fingers. 30 years of construction work had left my hands scarred and weathered, hands that had built the very deck we stood on, hands that had operated million-dollar equipment with precision and care. Food's for family, Travis said, his smirk a mirror of his wife's expression. But don't worry, Dad. You'll get a great view of everything. That's when I noticed it. Really noticed it. There was no chair for me. 6 people, 5 chairs, and a stack of shopping bags occupying the spot where a decent son would have made sure his father could sit. The badge felt heavier in my hand, weighted with 3 years of accumulated slights, dismissals, and casual cruelty. 3 years of being treated like hired help in my own home. 3 years of watching my son transform into someone I barely recognized, someone who could look his own father in the eye and declare him unworthy of a seat at the table. I looked around the circle of faces, Brittany's triumphant smile, her parents' amused satisfaction, Travis's entitled smirk, Linda's carefully neutral expression. They were all waiting for me to accept the badge, to take my place as the family curiosity, the blue-collar grandfather who could be tolerated but never truly included. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then I placed the badge gently on the oak table I'd built with my own hands. We'll see about that. 4 words, spoken quietly, without anger or theatrics. Just a simple statement of fact. The smiles faltered. Gerald's chuckle caught and faded mid-sound. Travis's smirk wavered as something in my tone registered, something he hadn't heard since he was 16 and had tried to take my truck without permission. The room went silent, the kind of silence that precedes thunder. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I glanced down at the screen. A calendar reminder flashed. Title check. Property lines. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd felt all evening. Later that night, I sat in my garage workshop, surrounded by the tools and memories of a lifetime spent building things that lasted. The New Year's Eve celebration had continued without me, of course. Through my window, I could see the warm glow from their movable house, could hear the distant sound of expensive laughter carrying across my yard. It hadn't always been like this. I pulled out an old photo album, its pages yellowed with age. There was Travis at 8, wearing my too large hard hat and grinning as he helped me frame the addition to our house. There he was at 12, proudly showing off the treehouse we'd built together in the old oak that still dominated the far corner of my property. At 16, sullen but secretly pleased when I taught him to drive stick shift in my pickup truck. Those had been good years, back when Linda and I were still trying to make our marriage work, back when Travis looked at me like I hung the moon instead of like I was an embarrassment to be managed. The change had been gradual, so subtle I'd almost missed it. It started when Travis went away to college, studying civil engineering on the money I'd saved from 15 years of crane operation. When he came home for holidays, there was a new vocabulary in his speech, a way of describing my work as blue-collar, with just enough emphasis to make it sound quaint. Dad's old school, he'd tell his college friends. Real salt-of-the-earth type. Salt of the earth, like I was some kind of folk artifact. The real shift came when he met Brittany during his senior year. She was beautiful, ambitious, and came from the kind of family that summered in the Hamptons and wintered in Aspen. Gerald Foster owned half the commercial real estate in 3 counties, and Denise spent her time organizing charity galas for causes she couldn't pronounce. I'd tried to like her. I really had. When Travis brought her home for the first time, I'd grilled steaks and told stories about the skyscrapers I'd helped build, the bridges I'd seen rise from blueprints to reality. Brittany had smiled politely and asked if I'd ever considered transitioning to management. I am management, I'd said, explaining my role as senior project supervisor. I oversee crews of 40 men, coordinate with architects and city planners, manage budgets in the millions. Oh, she'd said, her smile never wavering. How nice. That smile. I'd learned to hate that smile. The wedding had been at the Foster family estate, naturally. I'd worn my best suit and tried to blend in among the crowd of real estate moguls, investment bankers, and trust fund babies. During the reception, I'd overheard Denise explaining to someone that Travis came from humble beginnings, but was making something of himself despite his background. Despite his background. Despite me. The divorce from Linda came 2 years later, amicable and inevitable. We'd grown apart slowly, like continental drift, until one day we realized we were strangers sharing a house. She kept the retirement condo in Florida. I kept the property I'd built from scratch. Travis and Brittany had married right after his graduation, and I'd helped them however I could. When Travis landed his first engineering job, I'd been proud. When they'd struggled to afford their first apartment, I'd quietly helped with the deposit. When Brittany complained about noisy neighbors and cramped quarters, I'd listened sympathetically. But somewhere along the way, my help became expected rather than appreciated. My advice became outdated rather than valuable. My presence became tolerated rather than welcomed. The movable house had been Brittany's idea, a tiny home that was actually a sophisticated piece of modern architecture, all clean lines and smart technology. When they'd asked to park it on my property just until we figure out our next step, I'd been happy to help. I'd run electrical lines from my main panel, extended water and sewer connections, even helped Travis level the foundation blocks. "This is just temporary, Dad," he'd assured me. "Just until we save up for our own land." That was 18 months ago. Since then, the requests had become demands, the gratitude had become entitlement, and my role had shifted from father to groundskeeper. "Frank, could you trim those bushes? They're blocking our morning light." "Frank, the Wi-Fi is slow in our house. Can you upgrade your internet plan?" "Frank, we're having friends over. Could you maybe find somewhere else to be for the evening?" The final insult had come 3 months ago at Brittany's birthday party. I'd spent the afternoon setting up tables in my yard, stringing lights between the trees, preparing my deck for the celebration. When the guests arrived, all Brittany's friends and colleagues, I'd been introduced as Travis's father, who lets us use his yard. Lets us use his yard. Like I was some benevolent landlord rather than family. That night, I'd overheard Brittany talking to her mother on the phone, her voice carrying clearly through the thin walls of their high-tech house. "He's harmless," she'd said. "Just a lonely old man who doesn't understand that the world has moved on. Travis feels sorry for him, so we include him in things, but honestly, he's becoming a bit of a burden." A burden. After everything I'd done, everything I'd built, everything I'd given, I was a burden. My phone buzzed, pulling me from the memory. A text from Wayne Hargrove, my neighbor, and one of the few people who still treated me like a human being rather than a piece of furniture. "Saw the cars at your place tonight. Hope the family treated you right. If you ever need a hand with anything, you know where to find me." Wayne understood. He'd worked as an electrician for 40 years, had his own stories about ungrateful children and changing times. We'd shared more than a few beers on his porch, two old-timers watching the world transform around us. I typed back, "Thanks, Wayne. Might take you up on that soon." Through my workshop window, I could see the lights going out in Travis and Brittany's house. Tomorrow, they'd probably sleep until noon, then spend the afternoon planning their next adventure or improvement or expansion, all of it taking place on my property, with my utilities, under my generosity. But tonight, something had changed. Tonight, I'd finally reached the point where being treated like a stranger in my own home was no longer acceptable. I pulled out my laptop and began searching for a phone number I hadn't called in 2 years. Hartwell Construction still had my contact information on file, and I still had friends in the equipment yard. It was time to remind everyone exactly who owned this property. and what that ownership really meant. The first week of January brought an unusual warmth to the valley, the kind of false spring that makes you forget winter isn't finished with you yet. I was replacing a loose board on my deck when Travis emerged from their house, coffee mug in hand, wearing the expression of someone about to deliver unwelcome news. "Morning, Dad." He settled into one of my deck chairs without invitation, stretching his legs like he was surveying his own domain. "Brittany and I have been talking." I kept working, my drill making precise holes in the oak planking. "About what?" "About boundaries. About privacy." He paused, waiting for me to look up. When I didn't, he continued. "We love being close to family, but we're thinking it might be time for some separation." I set down my drill and finally met his eyes. "Separation?" "Nothing dramatic," he said quickly, the way people do when they're about to suggest something dramatic. "Just some physical boundaries. Maybe a fence between your house and ours. Maybe some scheduled times when you give us space to be a family. Give them space. On my property. In my yard." "I see," I said carefully. "And this fence? Where exactly were you planning to put it?" Travis gestured vaguely toward the invisible line he'd apparently drawn between my house and theirs. "Just something tasteful. Brittany's dad knows a guy who does high-end privacy installations. He said he'd cover the cost as a gift." Of course, Gerald would pay for it. Another way to mark territory that wasn't his. Another way to carve up my property, according to his daughter's preferences. "That's generous of him," I said. Travis smiled, mistaking my calm tone for agreement. "We knew you'd understand. You've always been reasonable about these things." Reasonable. Another word that had lost its meaning somewhere along the way. That afternoon, I drove to Hartwell Construction's main yard for the first time since my retirement party. The place looked smaller than I remembered, but the familiar smell of diesel fuel and metal shavings brought back 30 years of memories. I found my old supervisor, Pete Kowalski, in the equipment office, his hair grayer, but his handshake still firm. "Frank Mercer, what brings you back to this madhouse?" "Thinking about renting some equipment," I said. "Something big. For a personal project." Pete's eyebrows rose. "How big we talking?" "Crane big. Maybe the RT-890 if it's available." The RT-890, a rough terrain crane capable of lifting 40 tons with surgical precision. I'd operated dozens just like it during my years in the field, back when precision and steady hands were the difference between a successful lift and a catastrophe. "You sure you remember how to run one of those beasts?" Pete grinned. "Been a while since you were in the operator's seat." "Like riding a bicycle," I said. "Some things you don't forget." We walked out to the equipment yard, where the RT-890 sat like a sleeping giant among the other machines. I climbed into the cab, my hands automatically finding the familiar controls. The seat adjusted to accommodate my frame, the mirrors angled to give me perfect sight lines, the joysticks responding to my touch like extensions of my own arms. "Insurance and liability forms are the same as always," Pete said. "When were you thinking of using it?" "Soon," I said. "Very soon." From the construction yard, I drove to the county courthouse, a building I'd visited countless times over the years for permits and inspections. The records office was tucked away in the basement, staffed by a woman named Dolores, who'd been there since before computers. "Frank Mercer," she said, looking up from her filing. "Haven't seen you in years. What can I do for you?" "Need to review some property documents," I said. "Survey maps, utility easements, that sort of thing." She pulled the files for my address, spreading the official documents across her counter. There it was in black and white. 3 acres registered to Franklin Jace Mercer, with all structures, improvements, and utility access under my sole ownership and control. "Everything looks in order," Dolores said. "Property taxes current, no liens or encumbrances. You thinking of selling? No, I said, studying the survey map that showed every inch of my land, every building, every easement. Just making sure I understand my rights. That evening, I sat in my workshop with the property documents spread across my workbench. The legal language was clear and unambiguous. As the sole owner, I had the right to determine the placement of any temporary structures on my land. I had the right to control utility access. I had the right to modify, relocate, or remove any improvements that weren't permanently attached to the foundation. Travis and Brittany's house, for all its modern sophistication, was designed to be movable. That was the whole point. The freedom to relocate, to change scenery, to pick up and go whenever the mood struck. The foundation blocks could be disconnected, the utility lines uncoupled, the entire structure lifted and moved by the right equipment, operated by someone with the right skills, someone exactly like me. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Linda's name appeared on the screen. "Frank, Travis called me. He says you've been acting strange." "Strange how?" "Quiet, distant. He's worried you might be having some kind of episode." An episode, like grief or anger or simple self-respect, were symptoms of mental illness. "I'm fine, Linda. Just thinking about some changes." "What kind of changes?" I looked out my workshop window toward their house, where warm light spilled from every window, where my son and daughter-in-law were probably planning their fence, their boundaries, their new world order. "The kind that are long overdue," I said. After I hung up, I pulled out my laptop and began researching utility disconnection procedures, crane operation safety protocols, and the legal requirements for relocating temporary structures. The information was all there, waiting for someone with the knowledge and determination to use it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Pete from Hartwell. RT-890 available next week if you want it. Just say when." I typed back, "January 2nd dawn." Outside, the lights in Travis and Brittany's house began going out one by one. Soon, the only illumination came from my workshop, where I continued planning something they'd never see coming. The next morning brought visitors I hadn't expected. Gerald and Denise Foster arrived in their silver Mercedes, dressed like they were attending a board meeting rather than visiting family. Through my kitchen window, I watched them emerge from their car with the purposeful stride of people accustomed to getting their way. Brittany greeted them at the door of her house, and within minutes, all three were walking the perimeter of my yard, Gerald pointing and gesturing while Denise took notes on her phone. They were surveying, measuring, planning, treating my property like a development project waiting for the right investor. I was washing dishes when Travis knocked on my door. "Dad, can we talk?" I let him in, noting how he glanced around my kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time. Maybe he was. When had he last actually spent time in the house where he'd grown up? "Brittany's parents have an interesting proposal," he said, settling into a chair at my kitchen table. "They're thinking about making you an offer on this place." "An offer?" "A good offer, more than fair market value. You could buy a nice condo somewhere, maybe closer to Linda, maybe in one of those active senior communities." Active senior communities. Places where older people went to play shuffleboard and quietly wait out their remaining years. And what would happen to this place? Travis's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone describing a dream. "Complete renovation. Brittany's dad has connections with some amazing architects. They could turn this into something really special. Expand the main house, add a guest cottage, maybe put in a pool. Sounds expensive." "Money's not an issue for Gerald. He sees the potential here." Travis leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he probably used with difficult clients. "Think about it, Dad. No more maintenance, no more yard work, no more rattling around in a house that's too big for one person." I nodded slowly, as if considering his words. "When would this happen?" "Soon. Gerald likes to move fast when he sees an opportunity. He could have the paperwork ready by next week." After Travis left, I drove back to Hartwell Construction to finalize the equipment rental. Pete had the RT-890 fueled and ready, its yellow paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. "You sure you don't want one of our operators to handle this?" he asked as we completed the paperwork. "Whatever you're moving, we could have it done in half the time." "This is personal," I said. "Something I need to do myself." Pete nodded, understanding the way only another construction veteran could. "Fair enough. Just remember, safety first, ego second. That machine doesn't care how many years you've been doing this." From the construction yard, I made one more stop at the courthouse, this time to file a formal notice of temporary structure relocation. It was a routine form, the kind of paperwork required whenever someone moved a mobile home or modular building. I listed the current coordinates of Travis and Brittany's house and the new coordinates where it would be relocated. Dolores stamped the form with practiced efficiency. "Moving day, huh?" "You could say that." The new location I'd specified was at the far eastern edge of my property, right up against the tree line where a dense stand of oaks and maples created a natural barrier. It was still technically within the surveyed boundaries, still legally accessible, still properly within my rights as the property owner. It was also the darkest, most secluded spot on the entire 3 acres. That evening, Wayne Hargrove appeared at my workshop door with 2 beers and the knowing look of someone who'd spent 40 years reading between the lines. "Heard you rented some heavy equipment," he said, settling into my spare chair. "Word travels fast. Pete Kowalski's wife plays bridge with my neighbor. You know how it is." Wayne opened his beer and studied my face. "Want to tell me what you're planning?" I explained the situation, the badge, the missing chair, the fence proposal, Gerald's buyout offer. Wayne listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. "Unbelievable," he said finally. "Your own son treating you like that." "It's not entirely his fault. Brittany's family has a way of making people forget where they came from." "Still," Wayne shook his head. "So what's the plan?" I showed him the property survey, pointing out the current location of the movable house and its intended destination. Wayne whistled low. "That's going to be one hell of a wake-up call." "I need a spotter," I said. "Someone to watch for obstacles, make sure the utilities disconnect cleanly." Wayne grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from anyone in months. "When do we start?" "Day after tomorrow. Dawn." We spent the next hour going over the logistics, the route the crane would take, the sequence of disconnections, the safety protocols that would keep everyone involved from getting hurt. Wayne had worked with crane operators for decades. He knew the drill. "What about afterward?" he asked. "They're going to be madder than wet cats." "Let them be mad. It's my property, my decision." "And if they call the cops?" I pulled out the filed paperwork, the property deed, the utility easement documents. "Everything's legal and properly documented. They can call whoever they want." Wayne left around 10, promising to be back before sunrise on January 2nd. I spent the rest of the evening in my workshop, cleaning and organizing tools I hadn't used in months, preparing for a job that would require every skill I'd learned in 30 years of construction work. Through my window, I could see lights burning late in Travis and Brittany's house. They were probably planning their fence, their renovation, their bright future built on my land with my generosity. Tomorrow, Gerald would probably show up with purchase agreements and architectural drawings, ready to transform my life's work into his daughter's playground. But tonight, I had my own plans to finalize. I called the utility company's emergency line and scheduled a temporary service interruption for the following morning. "Routine maintenance," I explained. "Should only take a few hours." My calendar alert was already set. Dawn, January 2nd, all set for move. Everything was in place. All that remained was the execution. January the 2nd arrived gray and cold, with a thin layer of frost coating my yard like nature's own warning. I was awake before 5, moving through my morning routine with the methodical precision of someone who'd spent decades preparing for complex operations. Coffee first, strong and black, then a quick review of the weather, no wind, good visibility, perfect conditions for a delicate lift. I pulled on my work clothes, the same Carhartt jacket and steel-toed boots I'd worn for 30 years of construction sites. Wayne arrived, as promised, carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the expression of someone about to witness history. "Sleep well?" he asked. "Like a baby." We walked the route one final time, from the house's current location to its destination against the tree line. The distance was roughly 200 yards, well within the RT-890's operational range. The path was clear of obstacles, the ground firm enough to support the crane's outriggers. "Utilities?" Wayne asked. "Water and sewer disconnected at the main house. The electrical panel has a dedicated breaker I can shut down from inside." I pointed to the connection points. 5 minutes to unhook everything cleanly. The RT-890 arrived on schedule, delivered by a Hartwell driver who helped me position it for optimal reach. The machine sat silent and ready, its boom folded like the arm of a sleeping giant. "You sure about this, Frank?" the driver asked as I signed the delivery receipt. "It's a big machine for a one-man job." "I've handled bigger," I said, which was true. The RT-890 was actually smaller than some of the cranes I'd operated during my peak years, back when I was building skyscrapers and suspension bridges. After the driver left, Wayne and I performed a final safety check. Outriggers properly positioned, boom inspected for hydraulic leaks, radio communication tested and confirmed. Everything by the book, everything professional. My phone rang at 7:30, Linda's name on the screen. "Frank, Travis is worried about you. He says you've been acting strange since New Year's Eve." "I'm fine, Linda." "Are you?" "Because he thinks you might be planning something dramatic." I looked across my yard toward their house, where lights were beginning to appear in the windows. Soon, Travis and Brittany would emerge for their morning routine. Coffee on their deck, discussion of their daily plans, casual enjoyment of the prime real estate they'd claimed as their own. "Nothing dramatic," I said. "Just some overdue maintenance." "What kind of maintenance?" "The kind that should have been done a long time ago." I hung up before she could ask more questions. Wayne was checking his watch, noting the position of the sun as it climbed above the eastern hills. "They're stirring," he said, nodding toward the movable house. Through their kitchen window, I could see Brittany moving around, probably starting the expensive espresso machine Gerald had given them for Christmas. Travis appeared a moment later, stretching and yawning as he began another day of taking my generosity for granted. I climbed into the crane's cab, my hands automatically adjusting the seat and mirrors, my feet finding the familiar positions of the pedals. The engine turned over with a deep rumble that I felt in my chest, a sound that brought back memories of 1,000 job sites, 1,000 successful lifts. The radio crackled to life. "RT-890, this is ground control. Radio check." "Ground control, RT-890, read you 5x5. Wayne's voice was steady, professional. We might be retired, but we still knew how to do this right. "Copy that, RT-890. Standing by for your signal." I looked across the yard one more time, taking in the scene that was about to change forever. Travis and Brittany's house sat in perfect morning light, positioned to catch the first rays of sun, sheltered from the prevailing winds, close enough to my main house for easy access to utilities and comfort. It was a beautiful spot, the best spot on the entire property. Too bad they'd forgotten it wasn't theirs. "Ground control, RT-890, beginning approach." The boom began to extend, reaching across my yard like the finger of judgment itself. Through the crane's cab windows, I could see Wayne positioning himself near the utility connections, ready to coordinate the disconnection sequence. In their kitchen window, Brittany suddenly stopped moving. She was staring at the crane, her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. She said something I couldn't hear, and Travis appeared beside her, his face going pale as he realized what he was seeing. The boom reached full extension, positioning directly over their house. I activated the winch, lowering the lifting cables with the slow precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The first window in their house flew open. "Dad!" Travis's voice carried clearly across the yard. "Dad, what the hell are you doing?" I keyed the radio. "Ground control, RT-890, beginning utility disconnection sequence." "Copy, RT-890, disconnecting utilities now." Wayne moved efficiently from connection to connection. Water, sewer, electrical. Each line separated cleanly, professionally, safely. Within minutes, the house was free of all external dependencies. Travis burst out of his front door in pajama pants and a t-shirt, running across the yard toward the crane. Behind him, Brittany emerged in a silk robe, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Stop!" Travis shouted, waving his arms like he was trying to flag down a runaway train. "You can't do this!" I could, actually. The paperwork in my workshop proved it beyond any legal doubt. The lifting cables connected to the house's chassis with a series of metallic clicks that resonated through the crane's frame. I tested the connection with a gentle upward pressure, just enough to take the weight off the foundation blocks. "Dad, please." Travis was directly below the cab now, his voice cracking with panic. "We can talk about this. We can work something out." Gerald and Denise Foster appeared as if summoned by some rich person's emergency alert system, their Mercedes skidding to a stop in my driveway. Gerald emerged already shouting, his face red with indignation. "Stop this immediately! I'll have you arrested! This is destruction of property!" I keyed the radio again. "Ground control, RT-890. Beginning lift sequence." "RT-890, ground control. All clear for lift. Foundation blocks removed. You are go for vertical." The house rose slowly, gracefully, like a bird taking flight. 40 tons of modern architecture and entitled assumptions, lifting cleanly off the ground under the steady control of someone who'd spent 3 decades making the impossible look routine. Brittany was screaming now, her voice shrill with outrage. Put it back right now, you crazy old man." Gerald was on his phone, probably calling lawyers, police, anyone who might stop what couldn't be stopped. Denise stood beside their car, her mouth open in shock. Travis ran alongside the crane as I began the slow journey across the yard, his face desperate. "Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry about the badge, about the chair, about everything. Just put the house back." But it was too late for apologies, too late for explanations or negotiations or promises to do better. Some lines, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. The procession across my yard drew an audience I hadn't expected. Neighbors emerged from their houses, drawn by the sound of the crane and the spectacle of a 40-ton house moving slowly through the morning air. Wayne directed traffic, keeping everyone at a safe distance while I maneuvered the load with surgical precision. The house swayed gently in the breeze, its modern lines looking somehow fragile, suspended 20 feet above the ground. Through the windows, I could see furniture that had shifted during the lift. Brittany's expensive decorations, Travis's engineering awards, all the symbols of their polished life teetering uncertainly in place. "Frank, stop this madness!" Gerald Foster had abandoned his phone calls and was now following the crane on foot, his designer shoes slipping on the frost-covered grass. "I'll double my offer, triple it. Name your price." But this wasn't about money. It had never been about money. Travis was crying now, actual tears streaming down his face as he watched his house float toward the dark corner of my property. "Dad, please, I know we screwed up. I know we hurt you. But this isn't the answer." I keyed the radio. "Ground control, RT-890, approaching destination. Request final position confirmation." Wayne's voice came back steady and professional. "RT-890, ground control. You are clear to final position. Landing zone prepared." The destination I'd chosen was technically still within the boundaries of my property, still legally accessible, still properly within my rights as the landowner. But it was also the most isolated spot on the entire 3 acres, tucked against the tree line where ancient oaks and maples formed a dense canopy, where sunlight barely penetrated even at midday, where the morning frost would linger until afternoon. The house touched down with barely a whisper, the crane's hydraulics lowering it onto the new foundation blocks Wayne had positioned earlier. After 30 years of operating heavy equipment, I could land a 40-ton load with the delicacy of setting down a coffee cup. RT-890, ground control, load secured, disconnecting lifting cables. I shut down the crane's engine, and sudden silence fell over my yard. The only sounds were Brittany's sobbing and Gerald's furious muttering as he surveyed their new location. The contrast was stark and immediate. Where their house had once sat in perfect morning light, enjoying the best views and optimal sun exposure, it now crouched in permanent shadow. The dense tree canopy blocked not just sunlight, but also cell phone reception, satellite TV signals, and the wireless internet they'd taken for granted. The distance from my main house meant new utility runs would be expensive and complicated. They'd wanted privacy. Now they had it. I climbed down from the crane's cab, my boots hitting solid ground with a satisfying thud. Travis approached me with the desperate look of someone whose world had just been fundamentally rearranged. "You can't leave us here," he said. "It's dark. It's isolated. There's no power. No water." "There's power and water," I said calmly. "You'll just need to run new lines from the main house. Shouldn't take more than a few days if you hire the right contractor." Gerald Foster stepped between us, his face purple with rage. "This is illegal. This is harassment. I'll have you in court by Monday morning." I pulled out the folded papers from my jacket pocket, the property deed, the utility easements, the properly filed notice of structure relocation. "Everything's legal and documented, Gerald. Feel free to have your lawyers review it." Denise Foster was taking pictures with her phone, probably for evidence in whatever lawsuit they were already planning. "This is insane. You can't just move someone's house because you're having a tantrum." "It's not their house," I said quietly. "It's my property. I'm simply exercising my right to determine where temporary structures are placed on land that I own." Brittany had stopped crying and was now staring at me with pure hatred. "You bitter old man. You couldn't stand seeing us happy, could you? You couldn't stand that we were building something better than your pathetic little life." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who'd spent 3 years treating me like hired help, who'd handed me an observer badge and laughed while my own son declared me unworthy of a seat at his table. "You were building it on my land, with my utilities, under my generosity," I said, "and you forgot that generosity can be withdrawn." Wayne appeared at my elbow, grinning like he'd just witnessed the best show of his life. "Beautiful work, Frank. Clean lift, perfect placement, like riding a bicycle." The crowd of neighbors was dispersing now, their phones full of photos and videos that would be circulating through the community within hours. The story would spread. The night Franklin Mercer's family pushed him too far, the morning he reminded everyone exactly who owned what. Travis made one final attempt, his voice breaking with desperation. "Dad, I'm begging you, move us back. We'll do better. We'll treat you with respect. You'll learn to appreciate what you have," I said, cutting him off. Starting with the lesson that nothing in life is guaranteed, especially not other people's kindness. Gerald was already on his phone again, barking orders at some poor assistant about emergency contractors and legal injunctions. Denise was comforting Brittany, whose designer life had just been relocated to the shadows. Travis stood in the middle of it all, finally understanding that actions have consequences, even for entitled sons who forget where they came from. I walked back toward my house, leaving them to contemplate their new reality. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of arguments, blame and recrimination, panic and fury, the sound of people discovering that the world doesn't revolve around their comfort. The RT-890 sat silent in my yard, its job complete. Tomorrow, Hartwell would come to collect it, and life would return to normal, except for the movable house now sitting in permanent shadow against my tree line, a 40-ton reminder that respect isn't optional and family isn't a license to take advantage. I reached my front door and turned for one last look. In the distance, Travis and Brittany's house looked small and isolated, dwarfed by the massive oaks that now surrounded it. The morning sun, which had once warmed their windows and filled their rooms with golden light, was completely blocked by the dense canopy above. They'd wanted to build boundaries between us. Mission accomplished. The crane's engine was cooling with small metallic pings. Wayne was coiling up the radio equipment. The neighbors had returned to their own lives, carrying with them a story they'd be telling for years. And in the shadows, at the edge of my property, my son and his wife were learning what it felt like to be observers in someone else's world. I walked into my house and closed the door behind me, finally ready for that cup of coffee I'd been promising myself all morning.